Fat Puppy here, and I have the beginning of a really good ghost story to tell you, the true beginning. You can make up your own ghost story. I am on Liberty Street in Sumter, South Carolina, downtown. You can hear the traffic. It's really noisy here. I am across the street from Simpson's Hardware. At that location right there used to be an old Catholic church called St. Lawrence. And the priest of that church died in 1865 and was buried underneath its altar. Now, all of this, and you can't see it, but all of that, well, maybe you can see it. Let me see if I can turn this thing for you. All of that way to the next street over, all belonged to St. Lawrence Church. And it had a cemetery. All this over this way was a cemetery. They had about, according to the newspaper at the time, around the year 1900, had around 80 people in it. Well, they opened a new cemetery, and the newspaper said they think they got them all. They don't know. Hey, I hope you enjoy watching these videos as much as I enjoy making them. I don't get to make them as often as I'd like to, but I do make them when I can. If you like the story, this one here particularly, give it a thumbs up. If you've not already done it, subscribe. Help me grow my channel. And when you hit the subscribe button, there'll be a bell that'll show up. If you click that bell, you get notified every time that I put a video on. In 1906, the final burial was done in the old St. Lawrence Cemetery on Liberty Street. In 1909, the last person was moved from there, and that's the Catholic priest that we're going to be discussing. This looks to be about 2 acres, and it was bought in 1891 for the cost of $400. So, what happened to that priest? Towards the end of this video, I'll tell what happened. It's very interesting. Also, what happened to those people that were in that cemetery? Well, I can tell you. Most of them are here. This is the St. Lawrence Cemetery in Sumter. Now keep in mind, the old cemetery where I was just at, downtown, was also St. Lawrence because it belonged to St. Lawrence Church. Well, around 1900, 1910, St. Lawrence Church became St. Anne's Church. The old church building had been demolished, and they were without a church for a few years, or a permanent church I should say, until they built St. Anne's around 1910, 1911. The people are here. But what about that ghost story? You know, I've heard there were 2 that did not make it, that was not pulled up out of the ground, that they didn't know they were there. And they wander around the parking lot, confused, because everything's changed. I just made that up. Let's talk about TJ and Ella Toomey. Now, if you're local to this area, Toomey might sound a little familiar. It's the name of our hospital, or it was till a couple years ago when it was bought out. Toomey Hospital has been a long-standing hospital here since early 1900s. TJ Toomey was born in 1842 and died in 1897. He was buried at the old cemetery. His wife Ella, born in 1852 and died in 1909, may have been one of the first ones buried here. May have been. Now, the story behind the Toomeys are that he was wealthy, and he had a farm. He had a couple farms, actually. When he died, he willed that one of the farms would be sold and the money used to help start up a public hospital. There were several people involved with this that are also buried here that were wealthy, and they wanted to start up a public hospital and to give money towards the church that was being considered being built. And on the big farm that was out on Bell's Mill Road, which I think is still there, that the proceeds from that farm was to help support the hospital that's to be named after him, Toomey Hospital. So when he died, a lot of money went to the hospital, some money went to the church, and to the poor of Sumter. This is the modest marker of Daniel J. McIver. Now, he died from Bright's disease in 1899. He was 43 years old as he was born in 1856. Him and his brother John were local big contractors. They had a contracting firm that after he had died, his brother carried on. His brother built the Sumter High School of 1903, which later became the Girls High School. They remodeled the Opera House downtown, and they built, well, Daniel didn't because he'd already passed on. John built St. Anne's Catholic Church. He was the main contractor of that. Now, his son, whose name was John, also died of the same thing in 1926 at the age of 40. Bright's disease, if I remember correctly, that was a kidney disease. This is the marker of William H. Ingram. Now, William H. Ingram was lost at sea. Now, I'm going to read this to you, and then I'm going to tell you the story. This says, erected by his wife in sacred memory of William H. Ingram, born February of 1859, son of Dr. John and Jane Conyers Ingram of Clarendon County, South Carolina, lost at sea, January 30th, 1914, when the SS Monroe was rammed and sunk by the SS Nantucket off the Virginia coast. Now, you had these two steamships that were on the ocean 50 miles off the coast of Virginia, the SS Nantucket and the SS Monroe. Now, they were on a collision course, and what ended up happening was it was very thick, foggy weather. And the SS Monroe was accidentally rammed by the SS Nantucket at about 2 a.m., again, 50 miles off the coast. Hey, got a train going. I love them old train horns. And Mr. Ingram was a successful lawyer. He was in real estate, and he was very well liked. So the wreck, whenever the ship was rammed, it sunk within 15 minutes. It was a quick sinking. It was rammed and it rolled over quickly on its side, and then it finished and rolled over like this and then went down to the bottom of the sea. James Gainey Lee. So we're going to talk about a little bit of drama here. This man unfortunately was surrounded by death and misfortune there towards the end of his life. On him, he was born in Ireland in 1847. He immigrated here around 1863, and he died in 1909. He was a railroad watchman. He was 62 years old when he died. His son, Johnny Gainey Lee, died less than 1 year later at the age of 16. His wife, Rosanna, who was 27 years old, about 10 years earlier, shot herself. She committed suicide. And so the story goes that she was in very poor health, and her doctor said that she had been mentally aberrant for a couple months, and that Mr. Gainey walked out of the room, maybe out of the house, and she shot herself in the side with a pistol. The rumor was that she was dreading an operation that she was going to need, but her doctor said there was no talk of an operation, and that rumor was wrong. When I do these videos, it's the stories that I like. It's the stories of these people and the lives they lived and what they did that interest me, and I hope it interests you too. So here, this kind of intrigued me when I found it, and I had to do some research on it. That's the young lady's actual grave marker. Very, very modest grave marker right there, but she was a very wealthy young woman when she died. That is a grateful memorial erected by the church. Now let's talk about Miss Saliz Poole. Why were they so grateful to Miss Saliz Poole? So she was born in 1872 and died in 1905, February 1905. 33 years old, pretty daggone young. And so I did a little digging. I read some old newspaper accounts. So Miss Saliz Poole died, and this is what she died from. She apparently had cancer. She went to Johns Hopkins Hospital up in Baltimore to have surgery done, and she died as a result of that surgery. So when she died, she had a lot of money. She left in her will, and she was very generous in her will. She left enough money for 4 friends of hers to build modest houses. She left money to be given to the Toomey folks to build that hospital. She left money for St. Anne's to build their church, which they did in 1911, a few years later. Hence the memorial. Now, in her will, she stated that her brother was to take care of the money and make sure everything got divided the way it was supposed to. And so I looked for him. Anyway, I come to find out he committed suicide later. And he was born in 1883, died in 1910 at the age of 27 now. And he committed suicide by drinking bichloride of mercury. I had looked that up, bichloride of mercury. It was a drug that was used to treat syphilis, but it was also known for people who wanted to commit suicide. 3 tablets were enough to kill a person. And all I got to say is a person that would choose to die like that must not like themselves, because it's a terrible way to die. It burnt going down, it hemorrhaged you all in here, and now this is going to be gross, you threw up blood, and it was just a long process. So this impressive marker is kind of the opposite of the other one. Saliz Poole had a little small marker, yet she was wealthy and could have afforded much more. This guy's name is John Feehan. He was not wealthy, but his son-in-law was. John Feehan, who's buried here, was born in Ireland. A lot of these people were born in Ireland. This place is heavily settled by the Scotch and the Irish. So he was born in 1832 in Ireland. He died in 1893 in Glen Springs, South Carolina. But he spent most of his life in Charleston, South Carolina. And he was what was known as a dray driver and then a dray master. I had to look that up. A dray driver basically was a beer delivery guy. Now, he didn't drive the Budweiser beer trucks like we think of. He drove a wagon pulled by a team of horses that was loaded with barrels of beer. So he lived with his daughter here for a while and then moved to, I think either moved to or was visiting his daughter in Glen Springs. He had poor health, and the reason why he moved to this area was to improve his health. And he got to Glen Springs and he passed away, and then was brought back here and is buried here under this very impressive marker. Patrick J ODonnell. Now that's a good old Irish name right there if I've never heard one. That's his marker right there. Now he was born in 1842 in Ireland and he died in 1882 in Sumter. He was a merchant. He had a store downtown and he did pretty good for himself. This section of the cemetery is known as Babyland. This is where the babies were buried if their parents didn't have a family plot. What gets my interest, okay, most of these are from the 1950s up to right at 1970, but what gets my interest is that marker right there is dedicated to those that are unknown. They have little markers in the ground that I don't think you can see, but there's 14 of them, and these are, I guess, caskets that they found and they just don't know who they belong to. This is Babyland. Now to finish the story of the priest. Timothy J Sullivan was the last casket moved. And he was moved here in 1909. It's written entirely in Latin. Again, he died in 1865, was buried under the altar of St. Lawrence Church over on Liberty Street. He was the last one moved. He was moved by 2 priests, and they said after 40 years of being dead, his body was in remarkably good shape, and his vestments looked good. They hand dug him up and carried him to here. Something that I noticed, this marker, this priest is buried dead center of the cemetery. I walked it off. It's an even amount of steps that way, an even amount of steps that way, an even amount of steps that way, and an even amount of steps that way. Also, what got my attention is that nobody else is buried like this. You have people over there facing that road. You have people over there facing that road. The road just loops in and loops back out. But nobody buried in the center aisle of this cemetery.